Let's begin, very slowly, with something so deeply mundane that it may lull you to sleep without resistance. Imagine standing on a cracked, sun-dried street in ancient Rome. It's not the Colosseum, not the Senate, not a grand marble bath. You are in front of a full-on Ika, a Roman laundry workshop. It smells like ammonia. The air is heavy with the sting of old urine, sweat-soaked linen, and the long-forgotten ambition of ancient cleaners. And this, my weary friend, is where we begin. In the shadowy and less glamorous folds of the Roman Empire, someone still had to clean the togas. Not every Roman strolled through marble plazas with flowing robes fresh from the loom. Most had been stepped on, dragged through mud, and layered in days, sometimes weeks, of sweat. Life was dusty, crowded, and relentless. And that meant laundry was necessary. But, clean, by Roman standards. That's a term we'll need to redefine very gently. The typical Roman house, or domus, was not equipped with a laundry room. There were no washing machines humming in a quiet corner. No lavender-scented dryer sheets or soft cotton towels waiting to be folded. Instead, families sent their clothes off to be scrubbed, soaked, trampled, and twisted in places called full-lonic. These were often loud, smelly, and surprisingly vital parts of Roman cities. Before you picture laundromats with gentle music and rolling drums, step back. The Roman full-lonica was a workshop. Noisy, wet, often slippery with layers of grease, clay, and human waste. Workers, many of them slaves, or very poor freemen, stood ankle-deep in tubs of recycled urine. They trod on garments with their bare feet, slowly pressing out dirt and oil. It was as much physical labor as it was chemical process. This process, though grotesque by modern standards, wasn't seen as shameful. Roman society had a complicated relationship with cleanliness. Bathing was common and public. But laundry, mundane, repetitive, and essential, was a task quietly managed on the margins. Yet, it played a role in sustaining the appearance of Roman elegance. And appearances, in Rome, mattered. Even for those too poor to afford fine clothes, keeping garments in working order was essential. It wasn't about fashion. It was about not being mistaken for a beggar or a runaway slave. In a world where your clothing could mark your social rank, profession, or virtue, the stakes of having clean clothes were oddly high. But don't let that elevate the image too far. A stroll through a Roman laundry district would not inspire pride. The streets were often muddy, stained yellow with overflow from tubs, and filled with the sound of sloshing, splashing, and tired voices. The workers were constantly in motion, dragging water, wringing out cloth, fetching jugs of liquid ammonia from collection jars. Yes, collection jars. Romans were practical. Public urinals, known as urina receptacula, were placed around cities. Passers-by could relieve themselves directly into these stone jars. These jars were then collected by fullers, the laundry men, and brought to the workshop as the base of their washing mixture. The urine was diluted with water, sometimes mixed with clay or ash, and used to soak garments. In this section, we're not yet diving into the methods of washing. That will come later. For now, just rest your thoughts on the simple idea that laundry was never private, never quick, and never pleasant. Every tunic was someone's burden. Every towel a labor. And the rhythms of laundry, filling tubs, stomping clothes, wringing and drying, were like a slow, exhausting heartbeat pulsing through Roman life. In places like Pompeii, archaeologists have found detailed ruins of full-lonic. These places were built with care, basins carved into the ground, draining channels, even racks for drying. One of the best-known examples is the full-lonica of Stephanus, where workers managed a bustling business right up until the eruption of Vesuvius froze everything in time. Inside that full-lonica, workers would stomp cloth in vats built into the stone floor. Overhead, ropes were strung to hang clothes. The walls may have been splashed with droplets of soapy fluid, or rather, urine fluid. The place was bustling, vital, and completely saturated with smells and motion. Unlike our modern idea of laundry, As a solitary chore or household task, Roman laundry was community labor. You brought your tunic. You paid your fee. Someone else handled the stomping and rinsing. You came back days later, if the weather allowed for drying, and picked up something a little less stiff and a little less brown. But don't imagine that it was returned folded. Or even smelling fresh. At best, it was wrung out and aired. At worst, it was crusted with the residue of clay or dried too long in a dusty alley. It might be stiff. It might be unevenly bleached by the sun. But it was clean, by Roman standards. So as we drift deeper into this sleepy saga, hold on to the image of a tired worker, ankles in a vat, stomping rhythmically to soften another citizen's stained cloak. The sky outside is dusty orange. A dog barks lazily in the street. And inside, the laundry never ends. The empire marches forward. But someone still has to clean the clothes. Sleepy history is, after all, just the slow unraveling of everyday chores. Disgusting, tedious, and very, very boring. Let's slowly lower ourselves deeper into the washtub. The Roman laundry system was not just about elbow grease. It was also about chemistry. But not the kind you learn in a tidy schoolroom. Instead, it was the kind you smell before you see. The secret ingredient that powered the cleansing ritual of Roman garments was urine. Yes, human urine. Ancient Rome, in all its grandeur and philosophical genius, ran an entire cleaning industry on pee. To the Romans, urine wasn't waste. It was resource. Liquid gold, in its own acrid, yellow way. While modern cleaning relies on synthetic detergents and gentle bubbles, Roman laundry relied on the pungent punch of ammonia. And where does one find ammonia in the ancient world? In stale urine. When left to sit, urine naturally breaks down into ammonia, which is an excellent degreaser. Clothes stained with body oil, dirt, and food could be made cleaner by soaking them in this harsh but effective solution. It cut through grime like a sharpened blade through old wool. Romans didn't understand the exact chemical process, of course. They didn't know the term, ammonia. But they knew it worked. And that was enough. Urine was collected in jars placed throughout the city. These weren't placed discreetly in alleyways. No, they were proudly situated in public spaces. Outside of taverns. Near marketplaces. Along streets where men gathered. Men would urinate into them, and over time, these receptacles would be emptied and delivered to the Pholonic. This system was so embedded in Roman life that even the government got involved. The Emperor Vespasian, who ruled in the 1st century CE, introduced a urine tax. Fullers and others who made commercial use of public urine were taxed for it. When criticized for taxing something so undignified, Vespasian reportedly held a coin up to his nose and said, "Money does not stink." In Latin, pecunia non olet. It became a famous phrase. So yes, pee-powered laundry was not just tolerated, it was profitable. Romans accepted the smell as part of the process. The fullers knew exactly when urine was too fresh or too old. It had to age just right. A little fermentation. A touch of tang. Like the world's worst wine. The older the urine, the more potent the ammonia content. To wash clothes, fullers would mix this aged urine with water, sometimes adding in other substances like fuller's earth, an absorbent clay, or ash from burned wood. The garments were then soaked in this solution. It penetrated the fabric, breaking down oils and loosening dirt. After soaking, workers would step into the basins and tread on the garments. Back and forth. Rhythmically. Their feet became the paddles of an ancient, living washing machine. But this wasn't a spa experience. It was back-breaking. The smell was overpowering. Workers stood for hours, skin pruned and red, lungs filled with ammonia vapors. There were no gloves. No boots. Just flesh and urine and wet fabric. The floor would become slippery. Workers sometimes fell. Everything was coated in a fine mist of stink. It was not uncommon for laundry workers to suffer from cracked skin, infections, and respiratory problems. And yet, they continued. day after day, because clean clothes were part of maintaining Roman identity, a mark of dignity, a badge of order in a chaotic world. And for the fullers, this work, smelly and slow, was a livelihood, essential to the city's operation, as necessary as bakers or builders. The smell of a full lanica was so intense that it was said to carry downwind for blocks. Neighbors frequently complained, but the city tolerated it. After all, someone had to keep the togas white. Clothes washed in this fashion didn't come out smelling like roses. They were cleaner, yes, but the stench of the process sometimes lingered. Some fullers would rinse the garments in water with herbs or scented oils to mask the smell. Others simply left them in the sun to air out and hoped the odor would fade. Over time, imagine receiving your only tunic, freshly washed with a faint acidic scent clinging to it. You hold it up, wrinkle your nose, and shrug. It's cleaner. Technically. And in Rome, that was enough. As you lie still, listening to this sleepy drizzle of ancient inconvenience, you may begin to appreciate just how much effort went into even the most basic of tasks. Laundry was not quick. It was not clean. And it most definitely was not fragrant. It was soaked in social class, fermented with bodily fluids, and rinsed with just enough dignity to keep the toga white. In the next section, we'll explore the infrastructure of it all. The places, the tubs, the street-side jars, and the people who kept the city smelling just slightly less awful. So, close your eyes. Let the sour scent of old Roman laundry float past. And try not to think too much about the clothes on your own back. After all, it could be worse. You could be soaking in it. Let's continue this slow descent into the everyday grind of ancient Roman life. And now, we follow the flow, quite literally, of the Roman laundry supply chain. Because before clothes were soaked, stomped, and wrung dry, the fullers needed their key ingredient. And that meant collecting a steady stream of human urine. A process both highly organized and disturbingly simple. It all began with the urina receptacula. These were public urinal pots. Large ceramic or stone jars placed around the city, set near busy roads, outside of taverns, near markets, anywhere Romans might feel the urge to relieve themselves. And these jars had one job, to collect as much human urine as possible. There were no signs, no polite instructions. Everyone simply knew what they were for. A man might walk past one, lift his tunic slightly, and contribute without much thought, and then continue on with his day. A small civic duty. A warm offering to the gods of laundry. Once the jars were full, they didn't just sit there. Workers, often slaves, or hired collectors, would gather them and transport the contents to the full lanica. Imagine pushing a creaking cart filled with open vessels of stale urine down a cobblestone road. The sun beating down. The smell rising like a ghost of ammonia. No masks. No lids. Just splash and slosh and the ever-present scent of industrialized bodily fluid. This supply chain was essential. And like all essential systems, it had structure. There were networks of jars and schedules for collection. Larger cities had more jars, and fullers paid a fee, or a tax, to make use of the resource. This wasn't back alley work. This was organized, regulated, and entirely legal. As mentioned before, Emperor Vespasian even taxed this practice. The vectigal urine. The urine tax. It sounds like a joke, but it wasn't. The state recognized the value of this waste product, and found a way to profit. Even today in Italy, public urinals are sometimes jokingly called Vespasiani. At the full lanica, the jars were emptied into larger vats. Some fullers stored the liquid until it reached the ideal state of fermentation. The older the urine, the stronger the ammonia. A perfect solution for stripping away grease and oil from linen and wool. But not ideal for the nose. So now, the full lanica itself. Think of it not as a room, but as a complex. A small factory. There were typically three main areas. the soaking room, the treading vats, and the drying courtyard. Workers moved between these zones, carrying dripping garments from one tub to another. The tubs were often stone-lined and dug into the floor. Sturdy, slippery, cold. After soaking the clothes in the urine mixture, they were stomped. This was the core of the cleaning process. Men stood in the vats and walked in place, trampling the garments underfoot. Their movements were methodical, rhythmic, like pressing grapes, but far less romantic. Sometimes, they chanted songs to keep a steady pace. But mostly, they sweated and splashed in silence. From there, clothes were rinsed, usually with water, sometimes with more specialized mixtures. Some fullers added ash or clay to help absorb moisture and neutralize odor. Others used chalky minerals to brighten fabric. And some full-lonic were sophisticated enough to use mechanical devices for wringing garments. Wooden presses, rollers, not common, but not unheard of. Finally, drying. The clean, wet clothing was hung on lines or laid over flat racks in the open air. Romans knew that the sun could bleach and sanitize. And so they let nature do the last part of the job. Slowly, patiently, under the ever-watchful Roman sky. It took days. There were no dryers. No quick cycles. If the weather changed, if rain came or winds kicked up, everything had to be moved or done again. Laundry in Rome was subject to the moods of the elements. Just another delay in an already slow process. And so the fullers worked. Day after day. Jar after jar. Garment after garment. Their job wasn't glamorous. Their workshop didn't smell sweet. But without them, Roman streets would be lined with the foul stench of unwashed humanity. The stink of empire, held at bay by 1,000 jars of pee. As you lie here, drifting gently into sleep, remember this chain. A man relieves himself in a jar. A worker collects it. It's poured into a tub. Another worker stomps in it. And finally, a white toga is returned, crisp, and only faintly yellowed. A full circle. A stinky loop of civilization. In the next part, we'll step into the daily life of a Roman fuller. And find out just how hard, and gross, their working life really was. But for now let's pause. Take a deep breath. Maybe not too deep. And drift through the haze of ancient detergent. You live near the Fullonica, because you must. You are poor. You are necessary. But not respected. Your work is hard, messy, and mostly invisible. You do not wear perfume. You do not smell pleasant. The stink of soaked garments and ammoniated sweat clings to your skin. And even your dreams carry the echo of feet treading in wet cloth. The Fullonica opens with the rising sun. You join the others. Mostly men. Some young boys. Sometimes slaves. There is no uniform, but your tunic is old and stained. Everyone's is. You don't need to look clean, just make things clean. The first task is to sort the garments. Rich men's togas. Soldiers' tunics. Linen wraps from temples. Bed sheets. Woolen cloaks. Each fabric demands different treatment. Wool must not be rubbed too hard. Linen soaks better with chalk. The master fuller barks instructions. You nod. You already know. Then come the soaking vats. Large sunken basins filled with stale urine and water. You grip a load of clothes, heavy with human filth, and plunge it into the mixture. The smell rises up in a warm, invisible cloud. You do not flinch. You have learned not to breathe through your nose. The clothes sit. They soak. Some fullers stir the vats with sticks. Others use their arms. You once saw a man fall in. He came out white as ash and didn't speak for days. Next is the treading. You climb into another basin, this one wide and shallow. Your feet are bare. The garments are beneath the surface. You begin to step. Back and forth. Over and over. The rhythm sets in. Slap. Slosh. Slap. Slosh. Sometimes someone starts humming a tune you've heard since you were a child. It doesn't make the work easier, but it makes the day move. After a few hours, your legs ache. The skin between your toes is pale and wrinkled, sometimes bleeding. The ammonia stings. You don't think about it. You step out and rub your feet with an old cloth. Then, more garments. More tubs. The day continues. Slowly. Inevitably. Midday comes. There's a break. You sit on a low wall with the others, eating cold porridge or a chunk of bread. Your hands are stained yellow. Your fingernails cracked. Someone makes a joke. You laugh. But no one's smile lasts long. The vats are waiting. The clothes won't clean themselves. The afternoon is rinsing and drying. Buckets of water splashed over garments. Some scrubbed against stone. Others wrung out by hand. You hang the wet fabric on ropes stretched in the courtyard. The sun is hot. Your arms burn. But you are used to it. You've done this every day for years. Sometimes, the master sends a special request. A toga for a senator. It must be pure white. No stains. You rub chalk into the folds, layer after layer, until the cloth glows like bone. You finish and hang it carefully. A breeze lifts the edges, and for a moment, you feel pride. Brief, quiet. Evening comes. You sweep the floors, scrub the vats, empty the remaining jars. The courtyard stinks of water and waste. You don't notice anymore. You've stopped noticing many things. You walk home, past the same jars on the street. Still collecting. Always collecting. At home, you rinse your legs. Sit on a stool. Eat another crust of bread. Maybe some olives. You lie down. The smell is still on you. You close your eyes and dream of pale cloth and yellow water. This is your life. Not noble. Not heroic. But part of Rome. Every senator's toga. Every bride's dress. Every priest's robe. Passed through your hands. So, as you drift deeper into sleep, let your mind wander to the fullers of Rome. Quiet workers. Silent feet. Moving through a world of stink and steam. Making the empire just a little bit cleaner. One stomp at a time. In the Roman world, even the simplest things were touched by complexity. Laundry, for instance, was no mere swishing of cloth in a bucket. It was a full operation. A system. A toolkit of strategies, developed slowly over time, and operated by those who rarely received recognition. Let us now take a moment to examine the arsenal of the Roman fuller, the strange, grimy, ingenious tools that made Roman laundry work. First, the most indispensable and notorious tool, the licus fullonicus, or fulling vat. These were sunken basins, large, rectangular tubs usually built into the ground of the fullonica, or laundry workshop. Made of stone, lined with plaster, and sometimes tiled, they were designed to hold vast quantities of liquid. Not clean water, mind you, but a mixture of water and, more critically, urine. Human urine. Recycled, fermented, collected from public latrines or donated in jars left on street corners. Why urine? Because it contained ammonia. And ammonia, the Romans found, was a powerful cleaning agent. It cut through grease. It lifted oil. It disinfected. So the clothes were soaked in these vats, steeped in a pungent solution that, while horrifying to modern noses, made perfect chemical sense. Next came the feet. The fuller's primary tool for agitation. No sticks. No scrub brushes. Just human legs. Fullers would step into the vats, barefoot or with minimal covering, and begin to trample the garments. Like stomping grapes for wine, but significantly less poetic. The pressure and motion helped push the urine deep into the fibers, loosening dirt, oils, and stains. Slosh, step, turn. Hour after hour. It was back-breaking, foot-aching, and crucial. Once soaked and stomped, the clothing had to be rinsed. For this, Fullers used large jars and buckets. They would pour water over the garments, or dip them in fresh water basins, though fresh was often a relative term. These rinses removed much of the urine, but the smell could still cling. It might take several rounds. Fullers would wring the garments by hand or beat them against stones to shake loose any lingering filth. It was a process both violent and methodical. Then came the whitening phase. Romans valued pure white clothing, especially for togas, which were worn by citizens to signal status and cleanliness. But Roman whiteness wasn't achieved with bleach. Instead, fullers used creta a kind of clay, often chalky or rich in alum. This fine powder would be rubbed into the fabric, sometimes dry, sometimes mixed with water, to help brighten the fibers. Like rubbing toothpaste into a cloth. Slowly, painfully, thoroughly. There were also sulfur treatments. Not every full lanica had one, but larger operations sometimes maintained special sulfur ovens or chambers. Cleaned garments could be hung in these enclosed spaces and exposed to sulfur fumes. The fumes whitened the fabric further, giving it a brighter, cleaner appearance. But these fumes were toxic, irritating to the eyes and lungs. Dangerous, even. Fullers had to time their exposure carefully. A little too much, and the garment, or the fuller, might suffer. Drying required no fancy tools, just rope, wood beams, and the hot Roman sun. Garments were hung out to dry in open courtyards or rooftops. The layout of some full lanic included dedicated drying areas, high above the working vats. From these spots, long white strips of linen or wool would flutter in the wind like ceremonial flags. Beneath them, the workers carried on in shadow. A strange mix of beauty and drudgery. Tools weren't only physical. Techniques mattered just as much. Knowledge was passed down. Tricks for dealing with specific stains, wine, olive oil, blood. Methods for folding garments to avoid creases. Tips for handling different fabrics. Wool needed gentle hands. Linen, more force. And silk, rare and luxurious, was treated with near reverence. Communication was another tool. Fullers had to deal with clients. Not always friendly. Wealthy patrons might demand speed, precision, perfection, and they could be quick to complain. A stain not removed. A color faded. A cloak shrunk. For the fuller, a single mistake might mean losing a patron and their payment. Or worse, being blamed for sabotage. Some full lanic included workbenches with tools for mending clothing. Needles, thread, simple dyes to touch up faded areas. Fullers weren't just washers, they were fabric caretakers, restorers, preservers. There's evidence of laundry marks scratched into clothing, coded initials or patterns used to identify garments and return them to their owners. In a city as crowded as Rome, laundry mix-ups could turn social order upside down. A senator showing up in a merchant's tunic. Scandalous. And so, the fuller's toolbox was not elegant, not polished, but it was effective. A combination of basins, jars, footwork, chalk, smoke, and sun. Supported by memory, by habit, by the sting of urine in one's nostrils, and the ache of knees after a long day of treading. At the end of it all, the final tools were invisible. Sweat, endurance, pride. Even if no one saw it. Even if the clean white robe was paraded through the forum without a single nod to the fullers who made it possible. And so, next time you fold your laundry in silence, imagine those Roman tools. Crude. Effective. Smelly. The ancestors of modern washing machines, in a way. Powered not by electricity, but by the tireless shuffle of human feet. Cleanliness, as we know it today, is a relatively modern concept. In the Roman world, what it meant to be clean was something else entirely. Today, we imagine cleanliness as a bright, fresh scent, lavender, lemon, perhaps something antiseptic. But the Romans didn't have synthetic perfumes or citrus-scented fabric softeners. Their version of clean was more complicated. Let us begin with the basics. To the Roman nose, clean didn't mean odorless. In fact, most people walked around surrounded by smells. The city itself stank. There were no public garbage trucks, no underground sewage for the masses. People threw waste into alleyways. Animals roamed the streets. Even the grand temples and theaters were not immune to the sour odor of public life. Roman laundry was judged on different terms. Not how it smelled fresh from a dryer, but how it no longer reeked of sweat, grime, or food. The smell of urine. That could linger. But so long as the garment was bright and stain-free, it was considered well cleaned. Appearance over scent. A tunic might smell slightly sharp, but if it was white and crisp, the wearer felt respectable. We also must remember that bathing habits were communal. People visited public baths often, sometimes daily. And yet, they still relied on perfumes and oils to mask body odor. Soap, as we know it, was not widely used. Instead, oils were rubbed into the skin and scraped off with a strigil, a curved metal tool used to remove sweat, dirt, and dead skin. This left the body oiled, but not necessarily deodorized. So when people dressed after bathing, they often still carried a subtle smell of the street. So how did Romans actually describe the smell of clean clothing? Some ancient texts refer to purity or brightness, but few dwell on scent. The fullers themselves used sapo, an early soap made from animal fat and ashes, but only on special fabrics. It was expensive, rare. Most clothes were cleaned using urine and clay, and the scent that lingered was, well, a mix of ammonia and minerals. It didn't scream freshness. It whispered hard work. In some cases, perfumes were added to garments after cleaning. These were natural fragrances, resins, herbs, crushed flowers. Lavender, sage, or frankincense might be dabbed onto a cloak's hem or sleeve. But again, this was reserved for the wealthy. The average citizen could not afford such luxuries. For them, the smell of clean was simply the absence of filth. Now let's take a moment to consider the psychology of smell. Today, we are trained to recoil at the faintest sour odor. But the Roman nose was adapted to a different environment. The constant presence of livestock, the open drains, the fires, the unwashed crowds, these smells were daily companions. In that context, the pungent scent of a freshly cleaned toga was not offensive. It was preferable, even pleasant. This raises an interesting detail. Romans often valued the visual more than the olfactory. The white toga was a symbol of prestige. It shimmered in the sun. It dazzled in crowds. Its brightness spoke louder than its smell. In a society built on spectacle and public performance, looking clean was more important than actually being clean. Fullers worked tirelessly to achieve this illusion. With buckets, feet, and fermenting vats, they made Roman garments shine. There were even laws about whiteness. For example, candidates for public office were expected to wear extremely white garments, candidates, from which we get the word candidate. These clothes had to be dazzling, spotless. And it was the fuller's job to make sure they looked that way. Failure could mean social embarrassment or political ruin. Of course, the olfactory results of Roman laundry were not universally appreciated. Satirists and poets sometimes mocked the fullers. There were jokes about the lingering smell of ammonia, references to togas that stank of chemicals. But for most people, these smells were just part of life. Like the sound of carts on stone roads, or the sight of smoke curling from rooftops. Roman temples and forums were full of people who had passed through the full lanica. They wore garments that had been steeped, stomped, rinsed, powdered, smoked, and dried. The idea of cleanliness was present, but it was drenched in labor, in odor, and in practicality. It wasn't about comfort. It was about conformity. About looking the part. And so, to wear a freshly cleaned tunic was to smell a bit like work. A bit like stone vats and street-collected urine. But it was also to smell like civilization. Like Rome. Like the machine of empire, whirring behind the scenes, slowly, noisily, and perhaps just a little sour. So the next time you smell laundry detergent, remember that in ancient Rome, someone's idea of clean was soaked in pee, dried in sulfur, and praised in the forum. And everyone was perfectly fine with it. The Roman fuller's day did not begin with peace, coffee, or contemplation. It began with the stench of stale urine. Often before sunrise, the fullers, sometimes whole families, gathered at the Follonica to begin their labor. The Follonica was more than just a laundry workshop. It was a factory, a place of chemical transformation, human endurance, and quiet misery. Imagine walking into the stone building. The floor is wet. The air is thick. You can already hear the slosh of water in shallow vats. And see the fullers, sleeves rolled up, robes hitched, bare feet submerged in the washing tubs. These tubs are not filled with water alone. They are filled with a mixture of water, ash, clay, and the most important ingredient, urine. The urine was collected from piss pots, which were stationed on street corners by law. Citizens would relieve themselves into these vessels, and collectors would later haul them to the Follonica. The fluid, rich in ammonia, was the Roman version of detergent. It softened the fabric and broke down the oils from human skin. But to achieve this effect, someone had to stand in it. And stomp. And stomp. And stomp again. The fuller would often spend hours treading on garments with his bare feet. It was like making wine, but with tunics instead of grapes. The rhythmic squelching was broken only by the occasional grunt, or the slosh of someone repositioning their load. This wasn't gentle washing. This was agitation. This was pressure. The fuller had to ensure every fiber of fabric was soaked, flexed, and opened. After the initial soak and stomp, garments were removed from the vats and twisted out. Not wrung gently, twisted violently. The goal was to extract as much liquid as possible. But this didn't mean the job was done. The fuller would then transfer the garments to a second set of tubs, rinsing tubs. These were filled with clearer water, sometimes mixed with chalk or fuller's earth, a kind of clay used to brighten the fabric. Again, the stomping continued. More treading. More soaking. A single tunic might go through several cycles. Hours could pass just on one load. And yet, a busy Follonica processed dozens of garments a day. Some of these belonged to senators. Some to merchants. Others were for priests or actors or even gladiators. All needed to look presentable. When the washing was complete, the garments were laid out to dry. But not anywhere. They were often dried in rooms filled with sulfur fumes. Sulfur dioxide acted as a bleach, whitening the garments even further. The clothes hung on racks, soaking up the gas. The fullers, meanwhile, worked in these rooms with minimal protection. Their eyes burned. Their throats scratched. But the toga had to be white. After drying, the garments were brushed, beaten, and pressed. Some fullers used stones to pound out creases. Others used stiff brushes or metal combs. Finally, starch made from wheat paste might be applied to give the fabric a crisp edge. It was only at this point, after hours of physical labor, that the garment was ready to be returned to its owner. But the day wasn't over. The floors had to be swept. The tubs drained and scrubbed. New deliveries of urine received and mixed. Sometimes fullers also offered additional services, mending, dyeing, or even removing pests like lice or nits from clothing. The Follonica was a one-stop textile restoration hub. But the work was constant, repetitive, unrelenting. Fullers were often organized into guilds. These associations provided some support, mutual aid, shared tools, legal defense, but they also enforced rules. A bad fuller could be fined or banned. Reputation mattered. A senator would not trust his toga to just any vat stomper. Despite the grime and odor, fullers were considered essential. They were part of the Roman economy. Without them, the illusion of Roman cleanliness would crumble. No bright togas. No dazzling robes for politicians or priests. No crisp tunics for the upper crust. Fullers made the empire look polished, even if they never smelled that way themselves. Some fullers lived in quarters connected to the full Lanika. They ate, slept, and worked all in one place. Children might help stomp or carry water. Wives might sort fabrics or repair tiers. It was a family operation, every toe steeped in someone else's sweat and secrets. And the garments themselves told stories. Blood from a scraped knee. Wine from a late-night feast. Soot from the forge. All of it washed away, layer by layer, in the ammonia-filled tubs of the full Lanika. The fuller did not ask questions. He just scrubbed. Until the stains gave up. Until the fabric surrendered. By evening, the building reeked of effort. The vats were quiet. The fullers sat outside, tired, sometimes barefoot, always sore. The city around them still bustled. Torches lit the streets. Children ran home. Merchants closed stalls. But the fuller had already put in his day's performance, one that no one clapped for. No applause. Just the hope that tomorrow, another soiled toga would arrive. Another garment in need of redemption. And that, somehow, he'd have the strength to stomp it clean. It's easy to assume that Roman laundry was nothing more than scrubbing dirty tunics with whatever was available. But in truth, Roman fullers were early chemists. Their ingredients were natural, yes, but used with careful technique and surprising precision. They relied on a grim palette of substances, urine, chalk, sulfur, ash, and clay, to strip cloth of grime and restore it to an almost ceremonial whiteness. The most important of these was fuller's earth. Despite its poetic name, it was no magical substance. It was a type of clay, typically made of hydrated aluminum silicates. This clay had powerful absorbent properties. When garments were steeped in water mixed with fuller's earth, the clay would draw out oils, grease, and sweat from the fabric. Roman fullers didn't discover this by accident. The use of clay in cleaning textiles was known as early as ancient Mesopotamia. But in Rome, the material was standardized and refined. It was excavated, transported, and sold in large quantities to full Lanik across the empire. Not all clay was the same. Some types were better suited for wool, others for linen. A skilled fuller could distinguish them by feel, smell, and behavior in the tub. After garments were washed in urine and stomped upon, they were often transferred into basins filled with this clay slurry. Fullers mixed the clay with water until it formed a paste, not too thick, not too watery. This was applied to garments by hand, or the fabric was submerged entirely in it. The fuller would then agitate the cloth gently. Not to clean, but to let the clay work. It sat in the folds of the garment, absorbing whatever filth remained. Once the clay bath was complete, garments had to be rinsed again. Residual clay could make clothing stiff. So fullers rinsed repeatedly, usually with clean water, until the fabric was supple and ready for drying. But they weren't done yet. For white garments, especially ceremonial togas, a further step was required. Bleaching. And here's where sulfur entered the picture. Sulfur wasn't just a foul-smelling rock dug from the ground. To the Romans, it was a powerful cleaning agent. When burned, sulfur released sulfur dioxide gas. This gas acted as a bleaching agent. It whitened cloth, killed bacteria, and neutralized lingering odors. But the process was anything but safe. The full Lanika had special, drying rooms for this purpose. These rooms were sealed as much as possible, stone walls, minimal ventilation, and only small openings for smoke to escape. Inside, racks were built high to suspend garments overhead. Beneath the racks, the fuller would light braziers filled with burning sulfur. As the yellow rock burned, it gave off thick white smoke, sulfur dioxide. The garments were exposed to this smoke for hours. It clung to the fibers, seeping into every fold. Gradually, over the course of a long evening or night, the cloth took on a brighter, almost unnatural whiteness. This wasn't the sunny bleaching of clothes on a line. This was industrial fumigation. It left the room reeking, the air heavy, and the fullers coughing. Sulfur dioxide, while effective, was dangerous to inhale. Exposure caused eye irritation, coughing, headaches, and in high concentrations, damage to the lungs. And yet, Roman fullers entered these smoke-filled rooms daily. There was no mask, no protection, just the assumption that if you kept the door cracked and didn't stay too long, you'd be fine. Mostly, after fumigation, the garments were aired out, often in sunlight, to let the last traces of sulfur fade. Then came the brushing, using stiff bristles to bring out the fabric's nap. For some togas, especially those of senators, the fabric was pressed and creased into perfect folds. It was starching time. Romans didn't have spray bottles or irons, but they did have wheat paste. Wheat starch was mixed with warm water until it became a thick, sticky liquid. This was painted or rubbed onto the cloth to stiffen it. Once dry, the fabric could hold shapes, pleats, drapes, and ornamental folds. High-status Romans wanted to look regal. Their clothing needed to communicate power, wealth, and purity. And no toga did that better than a blindingly white one. The irony is, the process of making a garment look pure involved some of the dirtiest substances and most hazardous chemicals available to the ancient world. Urine, sulfur gas, and gritty clays all contributed to the final pristine appearance. The final product looked elegant. The process looked like a swamp or a chemical testing site. These materials weren't cheap, either. Fuller's earth had to be sourced from the right kind of clay beds. Sulfur had to be mined, usually in volcanic regions. Transporting these goods across the empire was expensive and time-consuming, which meant that larger Fulonic, especially in cities like Pompeii or Rome, often had trade relationships with far-off suppliers. Laundry wasn't just local. It was global business. Interestingly, archaeologists have confirmed the use of these substances. Chemical analyses of soil samples from Fullonica ruins show traces of ammonia, clay minerals, and sulfur compounds. In Pompeii, for example, the Fullonica of Stephanus still retains stone basins, drying racks, and evidence of chemical processing. This wasn't a guess. It was a grimly efficient system. All of this effort went into something most of us take for granted: clean clothes. But in ancient Rome, clean clothes were a mark of social standing. An unwashed toga might mean you were careless. Or worse, poor. Fullers helped protect reputations, even if it meant losing a few years of their own life to the fumes. So next time you toss your shirt in a washing machine and walk away, remember the Roman fullers. The men and women standing in ammonia and clay, squinting through sulfur smoke, coating fabric with wheat paste. Not because they wanted to, but because, somewhere in the city, a senator demanded to shine. And someone had to make that illusion happen. In modern times, clothing is personal, expressive, and often chosen for comfort. But in ancient Rome, clothing was a loud, non-negotiable message to everyone around you. It didn't whisper your status. It shouted it. And it had to look perfect, because perfection was political. To understand why Romans obsessed over clothing cleanliness and style, we must first understand how clothing operated in Roman society. It wasn't just about warmth or modesty. It was identity. Your clothes immediately told others who you were, your class, your gender, your citizenship, and even your moral standing. And unlike a modern business card, you couldn't leave your clothes at home. The toga, for instance, was more than a garment. It was a status symbol. Only Roman citizens could legally wear it. Foreigners, slaves, and women were excluded. For elite men, the toga was a required uniform for public appearances. But it was also heavy, difficult to wear, and completely impractical for manual labor. This meant that the more elaborate your outfit, the more it signaled that you didn't have to work. That your time was devoted to politics, speeches, or philosophy. White togas especially, bright blinding ones, were a sign of virtue and nobility. The toga candida, worn by political candidates, was so white it gave us the word, candidate. And that brightness didn't come naturally. It came from fullers and chemicals. Cleanliness, in this context, wasn't about hygiene. It was about moral superiority. A crisp, starch-white garment suggested that the wearer had self-control, order, and discipline. The opposite, wrinkled, dirty, or yellowed fabric was associated with laziness, corruption, or poverty. This perception ran deep in Roman culture. Dirt was not just matter. It was metaphor. Senators and magistrates took this very seriously. When walking through the forum, their garments had to flow in precise pleats. Their tunics couldn't be stained. Their shoes had to gleam. Even their cloaks were expected to drape in a way that made them seem both powerful and serene. Every crease was calculated. This obsession bled into the middle classes too. Merchants, artisans, even soldiers off duty, all aimed to appear respectable. It wasn't enough to be honest. You had to look the part. A well-laundered tunic could open doors. A stained one could close them. Women's clothing followed similar rules. The stola, a long dress worn by Roman matrons, was expected to be spotless and elegant. Though dyed fabrics were popular, their upkeep was difficult. A wine red or indigo stola might look regal, until sweat or soot dulled its shine. Roman women visited fullers too, or had slaves deliver garments to be refreshed. Sometimes entire wardrobes rotated weekly through the full lanica. But here's the hidden truth. Most Romans didn't do their own laundry. Especially not the elite. The smell of ammonia and sulfur wasn't something they tolerated in their own villas. Fullers were the invisible force behind the public image. They kept everyone's status starched and spotless. And yet, they were looked down upon. Because of their association with urine and filth, fullers were often viewed as unclean people, despite the fact that their entire job was making others clean. They worked in the background, essential, yet socially inferior. A citizen might brag about his pristine toga, but he wouldn't invite a fuller to dinner. The irony was thick as clay. This pressure to appear clean extended beyond clothing. Public baths were part of the daily routine. Romans believed that a well-groomed appearance was tied to a well-ordered mind. It wasn't vanity. It was civic virtue. If your clothes were neglected, what else had you let slip? Your morals. Your debts. Your commitment to Rome. Even in death, Romans cared about clothing. Funeral rites involved special garments. Wealthy citizens were buried or cremated in clean togas or family robes. Statues and tombs often depicted the dead in flawless attire. In some epitaphs, clothing is mentioned as part of one's virtue. To be remembered as always neat was praise. To be remembered as poorly dressed was a stain even the grave couldn't bleach. So perfection wasn't optional. It was demanded. Achieved not by magic, but by labor, weeks of walking garments from one end of the city to another, entrusting them to people who scrubbed them with urine, bleached them in sulfur smoke, and pressed them into folded submission. It was an entire economy of appearance. All to ensure that when a Roman walked into the forum, they looked like they belonged there. Even if it smelled like they didn't. The slow and disgusting nature of Roman laundry wasn't a side effect. It was the process. It had to be slow to get things just right. It had to be disgusting to remove every last stain. Roman society was built on appearances, and fullers were the quiet craftsmen who polished the illusion. They understood something that even modern societies forget. The way we look, our clothing, our grooming, our scent, is rarely about comfort. It's about control. Control of how we're seen, where we're placed, and how we're remembered. Roman clothing had to look perfect because life was a theater. And every actor was judged by their costume. Imagine walking into a Roman full lanica, the public laundry workshop of ancient Rome. The first thing that hits you is the noise. The relentless thudding of feet stomping on wet cloth in shallow stone vats echoes off the walls. Workers, often slaves or freedmen, move in rhythmic unison, trampling tunics, togas, and cloaks to cleanse them of grime and sweat. This noisy stomp was essential. Unlike modern washing machines, the fullers relied on manual labor to agitate the fabric. They didn't just wash, They beat the dirt out with their feet and wooden tools. It was exhausting work, done in long shifts in wet, slippery vats. But the noise wasn't the worst part. The smell was unforgettable. Ammonia from fermented urine filled the air, a pungent, biting stench that clung to skin and lungs. Roman fullers often collected urine from public latrines, or even paid for it. This was the primary cleaning agent, rich in ammonia that broke down grease and stains. To modern noses, it would be unbearable. But fullers became accustomed to it. It was part of the job, just as the loud stomping was part of the workday soundtrack. They were essential yet socially marginalized workers, trapped between the necessity of their role and the disgust it provoked. The Follonica itself was a chaotic space. Stone basins, wooden vats, and drying racks filled every corner. Fullers juggled dozens of garments at once, dipping them into vats of water, urine, and sulfur fumes. Each step of cleaning required different treatments and careful timing to avoid damaging the expensive cloth. Foul water drained into the streets, mixing with other urban filth. Steam and smoke from sulfur burners curled upwards, stinging eyes and throats. Fullers used sulfur not only for bleaching but also to disinfect fabrics. They burned sulfur in enclosed spaces, exposing clothes to toxic fumes that faded stains and whitened fabrics. Despite this, the process was delicate. Too much stomping, too much sulfur, or too harsh chemicals could ruin a garment. Customers often demanded re-washing or refunds if their precious togas were damaged. The fullers walked a fine line between efficiency and destruction. The pace was slow because of these careful steps. Clothes had to soak, be stomped, rinsed, bleached, and dried in sequence. Rushing risked ruining the fabric or missing stains that would mark the wearer as careless or low status. So the Follonica was both a factory of social order and a chamber of unpleasant smells and sounds. This noisy, smelly chaos was common in every Roman city. Folonic were widespread, often found near markets, baths, and busy streets where citizens could drop off clothes and pick them up days later. The steady rhythm of stomping and sulfur burning was the soundtrack of Roman public life. In many ways, fullers were the unsung heroes of Roman society. Their work was essential for maintaining the rigid social order based on appearance and cleanliness. Yet they worked in conditions few wanted to endure or even acknowledge. The Follonica was a place of contradictions. It was filthy and vital. It was slow and efficient. It was despised and necessary. And it was the reason why Roman laundry was as disgusting as it was slow, because maintaining the perfect public image was worth every stinky, noisy moment. In ancient Rome, fullers were the unsung, smelly laborers behind the polished image of the elite. Despite their vital role in keeping Roman clothes clean, fullers were socially shunned, and often regarded with suspicion and disgust. This paradox between their importance and their low status reveals much about Roman attitudes toward cleanliness and labor. Fullers were usually slaves, or freedmen who specialized in the complicated, foul-smelling business of laundering clothes. Their work involved handling urine, animal fats, and sulfur fumes, materials no respectable citizen wanted to touch. The pungent ammonia smell from urine was a central cleaning agent, prized for its ability to break down grease and stains. Yet this very association with filth made fullers outcasts. Interestingly, fullers were often members of a distinct professional guild known as the Collegium Fullanum. This organization regulated their work, maintained standards, and even offered social support. Still, fullers never gained respectability equal to the social classes they served. Their job was essential, but they were invisible in polite society. The irony deepens when considering that Roman citizens depended heavily on the fuller's skill to maintain the pristine whiteness of their togas and garments. The infamous toga candida, worn by political candidates, was bleached to an almost blinding white using sulfur fumes, a technique mastered by fullers. Yet those candidates would never be caught associating publicly with these workers. The social stigma extended beyond mere prejudice. Roman literature and satire frequently mocked fullers for their dirty work and unrefined manners. Writers like Juvenal and Martial, poked fun at their profession, describing fullers as smelly and rude, adding to their low reputation. Despite this, fullers wielded considerable influence behind the scenes. They controlled access to the appearance of cleanliness that Roman society demanded, making them gatekeepers of social respectability. Their skill could make or break a senator's image. If a toga was stained or faded, it was a political liability. Because laundering took days and involved noxious substances, many fullers developed techniques to mask smells and accelerate drying. They used fragrant herbs and oils after cleaning to cover the harsh odors. Drying racks were placed in breezy courtyards to speed evaporation. But despite these efforts, Fulonic remained smelly, unpleasant workplaces. This stigma also affected fullers' families and freedmen who tried to improve their social standing. Fullers often lived in poorer neighborhoods near their workshops, away from the grandeur of the city center. Their children faced obstacles entering higher social classes, despite the profession's necessity. The Romans' ambivalence toward fullers highlights a broader cultural tension, a society obsessed with appearances, yet unwilling to acknowledge the dirty work required to maintain them. The perfect image depended on unclean labor, and that labor was hidden away and disparaged. This contradiction is a human story as much as a historical one. It reminds us that behind every polished surface lies effort that is often unseen and undervalued. And that sometimes, looking clean and respectable, comes at a disgusting price. After the arduous and exhausting washing process, which involves stomping on clothes in vats of urine and water, soaking them in sulfur fumes, and scrubbing away stubborn stains, the garments still weren't ready to be worn. Drying the clothes was an entirely separate challenge, one that could stretch the laundry process out over several more days, sometimes even weeks, depending on the weather. Without modern electric dryers or even efficient indoor heating, drying was entirely dependent on natural conditions. Fulonic, the Roman laundry workshops, often had open courtyards or roof terraces dedicated to drying clothes. Workers would carefully hang damp togas, tunics, and cloaks on wooden racks or ropes stretched between posts, hoping for enough sunlight and breeze to carry away the dampness. But Roman cities were often crowded and densely built. Narrow streets flanked by tall buildings created shaded alleys, with limited airflow and scant sunlight. This urban environment made drying clothes especially slow and unreliable. On cloudy or rainy days, clothes could remain wet for days, leaving fullers scrambling to find alternative drying spots. Some laundry workshops took advantage of rooftop terraces or open fields outside city walls when possible, but these options were limited and often inconvenient. For the Roman clients, especially senators, wealthy merchants, and public officials, this waiting was a source of constant anxiety. Wearing a damp or smelly toga to a political rally, religious ceremony, or public gathering was unthinkable, as it signaled negligence or low status. Social standing in Rome hinged on appearances, and a spotless, crisp toga was a symbol of respectability and dignity. Delays in drying not only threatened the client's public image, but could also jeopardize important social or political opportunities. Fullers, therefore, had to work carefully to minimize drying times without sacrificing the quality of cleaning. To address these challenges, fullers used a variety of clever tricks and finishing techniques. They sometimes sprinkled fragrant herbs or essential oils onto garments after washing to mask the lingering ammonia and sulfur odors. Herbs like rosemary, lavender, and mint were popular choices, lending a pleasant scent to otherwise stinky clothing. In addition, fullers applied starch made from wheat or millet to stiffen fabric fibers, which helped clothes hold their shape and dry more evenly. These starch coatings also gave garments a crisp, fresh appearance once dry, something highly prized in Roman fashion. Despite these efforts, the clothes rarely smelled truly fresh by modern standards. The chemical odors from sulfur dioxide and ammonia clung stubbornly to fabrics, reminding everyone of the harsh cleaning methods used. Even when dry, the scent was a reminder that cleanliness came at a literal cost, both to the wearer's nose and to the dignity of the fullers, who worked in these foul conditions. Once dried, garments underwent a careful inspection. Fullers checked for any remaining stains, discoloration, or damage caused during the washing and drying process. Repairs were common, torn hems were stitched, holes patched, and faded dyes touched up when possible. This finishing work could add additional days to the laundry timeline, but was necessary to ensure garments met the high standards expected by Roman society. For the client, dropping off laundry meant relinquishing control and entering a waiting game fraught with uncertainty. Would the fullers return their togas on time? Would the clothes be clean, dry, and presentable enough to wear at the next social function? This anticipation was part of daily Roman life, an inconvenient necessity in a world without modern conveniences. Ultimately, the slow drying and finishing process was one of many reasons Roman laundry was both disgusting and slow. Behind every polished public appearance lay a long, unpleasant chain of labor filled with foul smells, noises, and anxious waiting. It was a hidden world that sustained Rome's obsession with image and cleanliness but demanded a hefty price in discomfort and time. While professional fullers handled most of the heavy-duty laundry for wealthier Romans, women, particularly those in lower and middle classes, played a vital role in managing laundry at home. For many Roman women, laundering clothes was part of their daily household duties, involving a mix of tedious labor, skill, and social expectations. This domestic laundry was equally slow and unpleasant, though it lacked the industrial scale and toxic chemicals of full laundry. Roman wives and mothers began laundry work early in the morning, often balancing it with other household chores like cooking, cleaning, and child rearing. Their tools were simple: wooden tubs, washboards made from wood or stone, and natural soaps made from plant ashes or animal fats. Unlike professional fullers who used urine and sulfur, domestic laundry relied on soaking clothes in water, scrubbing vigorously, and sometimes using alkaline wood ashes as a gentle cleanser. This method was less harsh but required more elbow grease and longer soaking times to remove dirt and sweat. Washing was a multi-step process. Clothes were soaked in large tubs to loosen dirt, then scrubbed by hand on washboards or stones. Stubborn stains were treated with rubbing or pounding, sometimes using small sticks or flat stones to simulate the stomping motion used in full laundry. Once cleaned, clothes were rinsed thoroughly to remove soap and dirt residue, then wrung out by hand. Drying domestic laundry was another challenge. Many homes had small courtyards or balconies where women hung clothes on lines or wooden poles. In urban apartments, space was tight, and drying was slow due to poor airflow. During rainy or humid weather, laundry often had to be moved indoors, further prolonging drying times and increasing the risk of mildew and odors. The process was physically demanding and time-consuming, especially for women managing large households with many family members. Seasonal changes impacted laundry routines. Cold winters made drying nearly impossible, forcing women to ration laundry or wear slightly soiled clothes longer. Summer brought relief with warmer, sunnier days but also faster wear and tear on clothing from more frequent washing. Despite the hard work, domestic laundry had social and cultural significance. Clean clothes signaled respectability and good management of the household. Women who kept their family's garments fresh and presentable demonstrated virtues prized by Roman society: diligence, care, and thrift. Conversely, neglected or dirty clothing could be a mark of poverty or moral failure. In wealthier households, women supervised slaves who performed laundry duties under their direction. These slaves often worked in private full-lanica-like areas within the domus, house, using similar techniques as public fullers, but on a smaller scale. The mistress of the house ensured laundry was done properly, managing timing so clothes were ready for events or daily wear. Overall, women's role in domestic laundry added another layer to the complex and slow world of Roman laundry. Whether through personal labor or supervision, they were central to maintaining the appearance and hygiene of the household. Their efforts often went unnoticed, overshadowed by the more public and smelly work of fullers, but no less essential. This intersection of gender, labor, and cleanliness highlights how deeply embedded laundry was in Roman social life. It was a daily chore wrapped in cultural expectations, time-consuming and unpleasant but crucial for the functioning of families and society. And just like professional laundry, domestic washing was anything but quick or easy. Roman laundry was not only a dirty and slow process, but also a significant economic activity that affected various social classes and the city's economy at large. Full-lonic, professional laundry workshops were small businesses or parts of larger commercial complexes that employed numerous slaves and freedmen, generating income through the labor-intensive service of cleaning clothes. For wealthier Romans, paying for laundry was a routine expense, reflecting both their social status and desire to maintain impeccable appearance, while for lower classes, laundering was often a self-managed, unpaid domestic chore. The cost of using a full lanica varied depending on the type of garment, the extent of cleaning required, and the urgency of the service. Togas, being large, delicate, and symbolic of Roman citizenship, required careful handling and more time, thus commanding higher prices. Smaller items like tunics or undergarments cost less to clean but were often laundered more frequently due to daily wear. Historical records and inscriptions reveal that fullers charged by the piece or by weight, with rates fluctuating based on demand and location. For many ordinary citizens, the expense of professional laundry was prohibitive. They relied on family members or slaves to wash clothes at home, using simpler and slower methods that did not involve the noxious chemicals fullers employed. This domestic laundry saved money, but required significant time investment and physical labor, especially for women responsible for household upkeep. Thus, laundry became a marker of economic status. Paying for full lanica services was a privilege of the wealthier classes, while others bore the burden of manual washing. The laundry trade also contributed to the wider Roman economy through its demand for raw materials and infrastructure. Full lanic required large quantities of water, often supplied by aqueducts and public fountains, which were costly to maintain and operate. Chemicals like sulfur and the collection of urine were commodities in themselves, bought and sold in markets. Additionally, fullers had to maintain their workshops, purchase tools, and pay wages to workers or manage their slaves, all of which involved financial risk and investment. In some parts of Rome, the urine tax imposed by Emperor Vespasian added a layer of taxation related directly to the laundry industry. This unusual tax was levied on public urinals, where urine was collected for use in fulling, showing the economic importance of this smelly resource. The tax not only funded the imperial treasury, but also highlighted how intertwined laundry was with Roman urban life and commerce. The slow, unpleasant, and costly nature of Roman laundry services meant that getting clean clothes was a deliberate and planned act, not a casual convenience. Clients had to balance the costs, timing, and risks involved in sending garments to full lanic, while domestic laundering required time and effort often invisible in historical records. This economic dimension sheds light on why laundry was both a vital and a dreaded part of Roman daily life. Laundry was more than just cleaning clothes, it was a small but significant industry influencing social relations, gender roles, urban infrastructure, and even taxation in ancient Rome. Understanding this helps us appreciate how something as mundane as laundry reveals deeper truths about the complexities of Roman civilization. In ancient Rome, laundry was much more than a mere household chore or service, it was deeply entwined with social status, identity, and public perception. The cleanliness and condition of a Roman citizen's clothing, especially the iconic toga, spoke volumes about their rank, wealth, and place in society. For the elite classes, a pristine, well-maintained toga was a badge of honor, a visual symbol of Roman citizenship and respectability that conveyed power and prestige to onlookers. Thus, the slow and complex laundry process, with all its foul odors and tedious waiting, was an essential, if unpleasant, foundation for maintaining social standing. The upper classes relied heavily on professional fullers to ensure their garments were spotless and stiffened with starch, presenting a flawless appearance in public. The immaculate white toga was not just clothing, but a deliberate political statement, essential during public speeches, ceremonies, or legal proceedings. Any sign of dirt, stain, or odor could undermine a Roman's credibility and shame their family. This pressure made laundry a matter of survival in the social hierarchy, forcing the wealthy to tolerate the slow, disgusting process of laundering just to preserve their dignity. In contrast, lower-class citizens often wore simpler tunics that were easier and cheaper to clean, sometimes washing them less frequently out of necessity or choice. Their clothes lacked the same symbolic weight as the toga, and so the urgency of laundering was less intense. For slaves and laborers, stained and worn clothing was expected, signaling their low status. This difference in clothing and laundering habits visibly reinforced Rome's rigid social stratification. Laundry also intersected with ideas of Roman identity and cultural pride. Romans prided themselves on discipline, order, and cleanliness, viewing physical appearance as an extension of moral virtue. Clean clothes were a reflection of a clean character, and neglecting one's attire could suggest laziness or moral weakness. This cultural attitude elevated laundry from a simple chore to a civic duty, linking personal hygiene with the health and success of the empire itself. Moreover, the public nature of many Roman social events meant that clothing was constantly on display. Senators, magistrates, and officials used their appearance as a tool of political influence, making the condition of their laundry a matter of public concern. This scrutiny further increased the demand for professional laundering, and justified its cost and complexity. Interestingly, the very unpleasantness of the laundry process was part of the social contract. Wealthy Romans accepted the foul smells, dangerous chemicals, and long waits because the result upheld their social prestige. The physical and economic costs of laundry underscored the exclusivity of elite status. Only those with sufficient resources could afford such meticulous garment care. In summary, Roman laundry was a crucial arena where social status was displayed, negotiated, and reinforced. It was a slow, smelly, and often disgusting process behind the scenes, but one that shaped how Romans saw themselves and others. Through laundry, the values of Roman society, order, discipline, and respectability, were made visible in every thread of fabric. Though the laundry practices of ancient Rome seem utterly disgusting and painfully slow to us now, they offer surprising insights into the evolution of daily life, labor, and technology that still resonate today. The Roman laundry system, rooted in laborious manual work, reliance on chemical processes using natural substances like urine and sulfur, and the complex social meaning attached to cleanliness, reveals much about how societies organize essential but unpleasant tasks. It also reminds us that what we consider normal or efficient laundry today is the result of centuries of innovation and social change. Roman Folonic were early examples of specialized industries and urban service economies, highlighting how cities depended on networks of skilled workers and suppliers to maintain hygiene and public appearance. The reliance on slaves and cheap labor for laundry foreshadowed many other labor systems in history where menial, dirty jobs were undervalued yet indispensable. Furthermore, the unpleasant odors, dangerous chemicals, and slow turnaround times show that technological limitations impose serious challenges long before modern detergents and washing machines. From a social perspective, Roman laundry teaches us about the intersection of cleanliness with identity and status. Even in today's world, clothing is a powerful symbol of personal and group identity, and the efforts people make to appear clean and presentable connect to long-standing human desires for dignity and acceptance. Yet the hidden labor behind laundry, often taken for granted or delegated to others, remains a reminder of the unequal distribution of domestic work and the invisibility of certain types of labor. Modern laundry technology, washing machines, detergents, fabric softeners, dramatically reduce the time and effort needed, making what was once a slow, smelly, and dangerous process into a quick, routine chore. This progress reflects not just technological innovation, but social shifts in labor, gender roles, and urban living. However, the environmental impact of modern laundry, including water use, chemical pollution, and energy consumption, echoes ancient concerns about resource management and waste. In a way, the Roman slow and disgusting laundry process invites us to appreciate the conveniences we enjoy while also recognizing the persistent challenges around cleanliness, labor, and sustainability. It encourages us to think critically about how everyday tasks are performed and valued, and how societies allocate the burdens of dirty work. Finally, Roman laundry reminds us that even the most mundane aspects of history can reveal deep truths about human civilization. From the stinking vats of urine to the finely starched togas of senators, the story of Roman laundry is one of complexity, hardship, and social meaning. It may not be glamorous, but it is a fascinating window into a world where something as simple as getting clean was anything but easy. Laundry in ancient Rome was an essential but overwhelmingly unpleasant and slow process that reveals a lot about Roman daily life, labor, and society. Far from the quick, convenient laundry routines we know today, Roman laundry involved a complex combination of manual labor, harsh chemical treatments, and social rituals that made it one of the most dreaded chores of the time. At the heart of Roman laundry was the full launica, a specialized workshop where professional fullers cleaned, whitened, and treated garments, especially the all-important toga. These workshops were noisy, smelly, and crowded places where clothes were soaked in vats filled with human urine, used as a potent source of ammonia to break down dirt and grease. Fullers then scrubbed and stomped on clothes with their feet, rinsed them repeatedly, and treated them with sulfur and other chemicals to disinfect and whiten fabrics. The process was slow, often taking several days, and filled with foul odors that made it unbearable to work in. Laundry in Rome was more than just a practical necessity, it was also a marker of social status and identity. The cleanliness and appearance of a Roman citizen's clothing, especially the toga, signified their rank, respectability, and citizenship. Wealthier Romans paid fullers to ensure their garments were spotless and perfectly starched, while lower classes either managed their own laundry at home or wore simpler clothes that required less care. This division reflected broader social hierarchies and highlighted how clothing and cleanliness were deeply intertwined with Roman cultural values such as discipline, virtue, and honor. Women played a crucial role in laundry, particularly in domestic settings. Whether personally scrubbing clothes or supervising slaves in wealthier households, they were responsible for maintaining the cleanliness of family garments through slow, manual labor using gentler soaps and washboards. This work was exhausting and time-consuming, often taking place alongside other household duties, and it underscored the gendered nature of domestic labor in Roman society. Economically, laundry was a significant business that required resources, like water from aqueducts, chemicals, and labor, sometimes provided by slaves. The state even taxed urine collection, demonstrating the importance of this dirty resource to the industry. The expense of professional laundry services made clean clothes a luxury for the wealthy and underscored the uneven distribution of labor and costs associated with garment care. Despite the disgust and slowness of the process, Roman laundry was a vital part of urban life, contributing to the city's hygiene and the citizens' social standing. The legacy of Roman laundry is still visible in how societies think about cleanliness, labor division, and social identity today. While modern technology has transformed laundry into a fast and relatively easy task, the invisible labor behind it and its cultural meanings remain relevant. Ultimately, Roman laundry was a messy, smelly, and slow affair that demanded physical endurance, chemical knowledge, and social awareness. From the pungent vats of urine in full launica to the delicate hands of women washing at home, the story of Roman laundry offers a fascinating glimpse into the daily realities of one of history's greatest civilizations. It reminds us that even the most mundane activities can reveal deep truths about human culture, technology, and society.